ChosenOne. This delay saved your future.
Isolation restores the voice that noise convinced you to bury. There was a season when everything around you sounded urgent. Messages came fast, deadlines stacked like storm clouds. People kept asking when the project would launch, when the results would come, when the waiting would finally justify the weight you had been carrying. Every voice around you treated movement as proof of destiny. Speed became its own kind of religion. But in the quiet that followed the delay, something startling happened. The silence did not weaken you, it returned you to yourself. What felt like abandonment was actually the first honest room you had entered in a long time. The noise had been so constant, so persuasive, that it taught you to distrust your own inner signal. It convinced you to bury the part of you that could sense what was off before your mind could explain it. And only when the doors closed, only when the timeline broke apart, only when the world stopped applauding momentum, did that buried voice begin speaking again. Not loudly, not dramatically, just truthfully. At first it came as discomfort, a sentence in your chest that would not settle. A strange heaviness every time you tried to force the original plan back to life. You kept telling yourself the delay was the problem, but deep down another knowing was forming. The delay was not the interruption. The original direction was, there are moments in life when what appears to be a setback is actually a rescue disguised as inconvenience, and this was one of those moments. The project you wanted so badly to move forward was built on one assumption you had never fully questioned. It looked brilliant from the outside. It was polished, efficient, and full of promise. People admired it. Some even envied how close you seemed to break through. But hidden beneath the clean structure was a fault line. One wrong partnership. One rushed decision. One missing piece of truth. One blind spot, large enough to collapse everything after success had already made it public. If it had moved on your preferred timeline, it would not have simply gone live. It would have gone wrong. And the hardest part is this: at the time, you would have called it victory. That is how some mistakes enter our lives, not as obvious disasters, but as beautifully packaged outcomes we are emotionally unprepared to examine. So the delay arrived like winter. Cold. Unwanted. Unexplained. People around you interpreted it as failure. Some lost confidence. Some disappeared. Some subtly moved on to the next bright thing, because the world often loves beginnings more than integrity. But your soul was being asked to do something rarer than starting. It was being asked to listen. Think about a river in the rainy season. From above, it looks powerful because it moves fast, muddy and full, carrying branches, debris, and everything loose enough to be taken. But when the waters recede, the riverbed reveals what truly belongs there: stone, shape, direction, depth. That delay was your receding water. It removed the emotional flood. It exposed the riverbed of your intention. And there, beneath all the urgency, you finally saw what had been buried. You were about to build something impressive on a misaligned foundation. Not because you were foolish, because you were tired. And exhaustion has a way of making almost right things feel right enough. This is the lived truth few people speak about. Major mistakes are rarely born from ignorance alone. They are born from emotional hunger, from the need to prove that the waiting meant something, from the fear that if this opportunity passed, another one might not come, from the loneliness of carrying a vision so long that even a flawed opening begins to look sacred. You were not weak for wanting it. You were human. You had invested time, identity, and hope into something that had become more than a project. It had become evidence, proof that your suffering was leading somewhere visible. So when it stalled, it felt personal. It felt like life itself had misread your devotion. But isolation began restoring what applause had interrupted. Away from everyone's expectations, you started remembering details your spirit had noticed months earlier. The uneasy conversation you dismissed. The numbers that looked clean but felt strangely fragile. The collaborator whose charm moved faster than their character. The business model that depended on pressure rather than value. The timeline that required you to betray your own standards in small, temporary ways. During motion, those warnings had been drowned out. In delay, they became undeniable. This is why not every closed door is rejection. Some doors close because your future self would not survive what your current self is still trying to normalize. The delay was protection not from failure, but from false success. There is a difference. Failure teaches openly. False success seduces silently. Failure wounds the ego. False success can deform the soul. Because once something works, it becomes harder to admit it was wrong from the beginning. The strange mercy in your story is that the pause came before the public outcome, before the contracts deepened, before your name attached itself to a structure that would later crack, before your integrity had to choose between truth and reputation. The project stopped while it was still possible to pivot without collapse. That was not punishment. That was grace with rough edges. And yes, it hurt. Of course it did. There is grief in being saved from something you still wanted. There is a sorrow unique to divine delay, mourning the version of life that almost happened even after realizing it would have harmed you. People do not talk enough about this kind of grief, because it does not look noble. You are not grieving a tragedy everyone understands. You are grieving an almost success, an almost launch, an almost life, an almost identity, and almost has its own ghosts. They visit in the quiet hours and ask dangerous questions. What if it had worked? What if the risk was worth it? What if this waiting is making you lose momentum forever? But deeper wisdom asks a different question. What part of you was willing to call misalignment destiny simply because it arrived wearing urgency? That question changed everything. Because the delay stopped being a problem to solve and became a mirror to study. You began noticing a pattern that had followed you beyond this one project. Whenever something moved quickly, part of you felt validated. Whenever something slowed down, part of you felt forgotten. This was not just about business, work, or timing. It was about identity. Somewhere in your past you learned to associate speed with worth, progress with love, productivity with safety. So when life delayed the project, it touched an old wound deeper than the situation itself. It pressed against the fear that stillness means irrelevance. But stillness is not irrelevance. Stillness is where truth regains its original voice. The practical lesson hidden inside this season is not merely be patient. It is more transformative than patience. It is discernment through distance. Distance from urgency. Distance from borrowed expectations. Distance from the emotional static of people who only support you when things are visibly moving. The delay taught you to step back far enough to see the architecture of your decisions. And once you did, the flaw became obvious. You had designed the next chapter around external confirmation instead of inner congruence. The project was aiming to impress the world while quietly betraying the values that made your vision worth building. That is the kind of mistake delay was born to expose. Imagine an archer in fog. From close range, every direction looks possible. Confidence can mimic clarity, but when the fog lifts, you realize the arrow would have flown beautifully toward the wrong mountain. The pause was your fog lifting. It was not taking away your shot. It was restoring your sight. This is why isolation became sacred. Not because loneliness is holy by itself, but because it removed the echo chamber. Without everyone's opinions, you could finally hear the small truths. You noticed which parts of the project made your body tense. You noticed where your joy vanished and only obligation remained. You noticed the subtle places where fear had disguised itself as strategy. You noticed that one major decision had been made from panic, not wisdom. And that single choice, if left untouched, would have multiplied into a much larger fracture later. Delay saved you from the cost of compounding error. That is protection in its most practical form. Not lightning from heaven. Not mystical spectacle. Just the merciful interruption of momentum before a mistake becomes infrastructure. There is something deeply spiritual about being slowed down enough to become honest. Because honesty requires time. Speed can hide self-betrayal. Delay reveals it. In the weeks that followed, you probably felt stripped. Not dramatic devastation. Something quieter. Like standing in a room after moving all the furniture and realizing how much space you actually have. That spaciousness can feel terrifying at first. Without constant doing, your mind begins surfacing truths it postponed. You started asking better questions. Was this project built from calling or compensation? Was this expansion aligned, or was it an attempt to outrun the discomfort of uncertainty? Was the timeline wise, or was it driven by the fear of being left behind? These questions did not make you weaker. They made you clean. And clarity often feels like loss before it feels like liberation. Because you have to release the illusion before you can inherit the truth. The beautiful thing is that the delay did more than prevent a mistake. It matured the one making the decision. Had the project launched on time, even if you later recognized the flaw, you might not have had the internal strength to change course. But delay built that strength. It strengthened your capacity to disappoint the version of yourself that only trusted speed. It taught you to withstand the discomfort of not knowing. It showed you that urgency is not always a signal to move. Sometimes it is a signal to investigate what fear is trying to rush past. And now the future you are stepping toward is quieter but cleaner. Less dazzling at first glance. Far more durable. This is where many people miss the miracle. They keep praying for open doors while ignoring the wisdom hidden inside, postponed ones. But your postponed season rewired your standards. Now you know what inner friction feels like before disaster. Now you recognize the emotional hunger that tries to crown the first available option. Now you understand that protection sometimes arrives as a broken schedule, a delayed email, a postponed deal, a project that refuses to align until your inner world does. This knowledge is worth more than speed, because it will follow you into every future decision. The project that eventually emerges from this season will not simply be a repaired version of the old one. It will be fundamentally truer, built with fewer hidden fractures, aligned with values you had once been willing to negotiate, powered by a version of you no longer desperate to make motion prove worth. And this is where the spiritual center of your story lives. Not in the delay itself, but in the restoration of your inner authority. The voice noise convinced you to bury has returned. It does not shout. It does not beg. It simply knows. It knows when excitement is masking fear. It knows when an opportunity flatters the ego but starves the soul. It knows when timing is off, even if logic says yes. It knows when a pause is not loss, but intelligent mercy. Trust that voice. It was absent only because chaos made subtle truth feel unimportant. Now it is back, and it is wiser than your urgency. The delayed project became your teacher. It taught you that being saved rarely feels glorious in the moment. Sometimes it feels like embarrassment. Sometimes it feels like explaining to people why things are taking longer than expected. Sometimes it feels like sitting alone with your own disappointment while everyone else seems to be accelerating. But beneath all of that, something precious was happening. Your future was being protected from a version of success that would have cost too much. The mistake was major, not because it was obvious, but because it was almost invisible. And the most dangerous mistakes are always the ones hidden inside our strengths. Your ambition, your resilience, your ability to carry pressure, your willingness to make things happen. These gifts are beautiful. But without reflection, even gifts can become vehicles for misalignment. The delay inserted reflection back into power. That is why this season mattered. Not because nothing happened, because the right thing happened before the visible thing happened. There is a profound difference. Visible success changes your circumstances. Invisible correction changes your destiny. Now, when the project returns in its new form, it will carry the intelligence of this waiting. It will move slower where slowness protects quality. It will choose people whose character can survive pressure. It will refuse shortcuts that demand silent self-betrayal. It will prioritize truth over optics. And because of that, it will last. This is the paradox. The delay that looked like lost time was actually structural reinforcement. The silence was scaffolding. The waiting was blueprint revision. The loneliness was calibration. Nothing was wasted. Even your frustration served a purpose. It showed you how deeply you had tied identity to timeline. And once you saw that, you became freer than the project itself. Now your worth no longer rises and falls with launch dates. Now your peace is not hostage to deadlines. Now your decisions are informed by resonance, not panic. This is how protection becomes transformation. Not by removing all pain, but by converting delay into wisdom you can carry forever. So if you're still in that quiet season now, do not insult the pause by calling it empty. Something is being purified beneath the surface. A wrong assumption. A hidden flaw. A fear-based dependency. A partnership that looked right but was built on unstable ground. A version of ambition that forgot to ask whether the soul could live inside the result. Let the silence finish its work. Let the river recede. Let the fog lift. Let the buried voice speak without interruption. Because what is coming after this delay will not merely be successful. It will be honest. And honest things endure. So today, release the shame around the slowdown. Release the need to explain your timeline to people who only understand visible motion. Release the false grief that says delay means denial. Sometimes the holiest protection comes dressed as inconvenience. Sometimes the greatest love in your life is the refusal of things to move until they are true. And one day you will look back at this postponed chapter, not as the season that held you back, but as the sacred interruption that kept you from building your future on a beautiful mistake. Affirmations. I trust the wisdom hidden inside every delay. What pauses in my life is being purified, not denied. My future is protected by truth, not speed. Blessing. May the silence around you become a sanctuary of clear seeing. May every delay expose what urgency tried to hide. May your heart grow brave enough to honor truth over timing, integrity over image, and peace over pressure. May what returns to your hands be cleaner, wiser, and worthy of the life you are truly meant to build. And may the voice within you, once buried by noise, now lead you with calm certainty into a future protected by grace.